Welcome, everyone, to the Kimberlite webinar to take a comprehensive look at the formation evaluation services market. My name is David Batt. I'm the president of Kimberlite Research, and I'm glad that you can join us here today. This is the 26th webinar and the series from Kimberlite that we host on behalf of the oil and gas operating companies and operators who participate in our industry research. These webinars are provided as a professional courtesy and a thank you to the many oil and gas operators worldwide who participate in our Kimberlite industry surveys. Our past webinars have included reviews of many of the oil field products and services most used in the industry, such as directional drilling services, hydraulic fracturing, artificial lifts, cementing, wellheads, and others. We've recently taken a look at a comprehensive review of the Big Four oil field service providers, SLB, Halliburton, Baker Hughes, and Weatherford. We've also taken a deep dive into the Permian Basin as well. Let us know if you or your colleagues need access to these webinars. To send us a chat message or an email. We often collaborate directly with oil and gas operators worldwide, and we're glad to provide customized presentations to your oil company as well. If it's needed, just let us know. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the wireline logging services, logging while drilling, mud logging, and coring analysis, all part of the formation evaluation series of reports here at Kimberlite. For those of you that are not that familiar with Kimberlite Research, I will provide a brief background about Kimberlite and how we conduct our research, and then dive in. For those of you that are a little bit less familiar with Kimberlite, each year we interview 3,000 users of oil field services globally through one-on-one phone interviews. Some of you on the webinar with us today have participated in our past industry studies. And then if you have, I want to say thank you for that. Feel free to reach out if you would like to participate in future industry surveys, and we'll connect with you when we do that. Our research is about half international, half North America. We produce a whole series of reports talking to drilling engineers, completion engineers, production engineers, subsea engineers, as well as formation evaluation and such. Today, we'll be covering just logging while drilling, wireline logging, mud logging, downhole coring, and analysis. We've been updating these reports annually, every year since 2017, and the performance trends that I'll be sharing with you today are based on the interviews with over 1,500 customer interviews over these years and over 55,000 supplier performance ratings. And so the data set is fairly rich and multidimensional. In fact, in this exhibit, we cross-plot oil field service company performance on the x-axis versus pricing competitiveness on the y-axis. And this quadrant map we'll be using quite a bit today. So I'll give a brief explanation to these four quadrants real quick. The top right-hand quadrant, if an oil field service company plots in the top right-hand quadrant, they're viewed as a premium offering, costs more but worth it. If an oil field service company plots in the bottom left-hand quadrant, they're viewed as a discount offering, may not perform as strong as industry average, but delivers attractive pricing, so you get what you pay for. Bottom right, value advantaged, and top left would be value disadvantaged. Any oil field service company plotting in the top left-hand quadrant would be viewed by the users as not delivering a good, strong value proposition and needs to improve performance or maybe adjust pricing strategies to be back in alignment with the fair value fairway here. For the oil and gas operators on the call today, as you know, many of you know, I began my career at Chevron. Typically, oil companies would be looking for best value for their oil field service providers, and they typically look for oil field service providers that are either in the top right, or bottom left quadrant, depending upon the application. And so I really encourage the oil and gas operators to collaborate with the oil field service providers to understand each oil field service company's particular strengths and weaknesses, and how that oil field service company can best meet the needs for the operator. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, some of you on the call may or may not be as familiar with wireline logging and logging while drilling and coring and mud logging, or surface logging as many people refer to it. But basically, through all these measurements, be it porosity, permeability, oil gas saturation, pressure, organic content. All these measurements are really designed to help the oil and gas operator to determine if the well can produce in commercial and economic quantities. Some of these analyses are captured in real time, like logging while drilling or mud logging. Others are captured after the well's been drilled, and we go into an open hole with wireline logging, and we grab some cores and analysis. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Overall, when you take a look at the overall market for formation evaluation services, what we find is that the sentiment for the industry is still relatively strong. You've got about 46% of the oil and gas operators worldwide indicating that their expenditures for formation evaluation services to expand and grow in 23 versus 22, and the other half keeping expenditures relatively flat. When you look at the overall diffusion index, and you can see the critical 50 index right here, anything below 50 is in contraction mode, we are seeing that the offshore environment, the offshore operators are continuing to invest at an increasing rate, whereas growth in North America land is beginning to moderate and roll over. When we take a look at the key developments in formation evaluation that are bringing the oil and gas operators success, the North America land operators most commonly cite LWD and geosteering advancements in mass spectrometry and NMR tools, followed along with some advancements in mud logging and data analytics, whereas the international land operators most commonly cite LWD, but they also talk about improved imaging and imaging tools and higher resolution and accuracy type tools, along with formation sampling and real-time data. Now, these are open-ended questions when we interview the oil and gas operators, and we read through hundreds of comments in order to place the comments into these categories or buckets for analysis. But I placed a few comments off to the right just to add a little color and texture for the detail that we pick up in these surveys. And in many cases, specific technologies from either Schlumberger or SLB or Halliburton or Baker Hughes are cited as bringing value to the oil and gas operators. And it's very clear that technology continues to drive the future. The offshore oil and gas operators, in addition to citing LWD and geosteering advancements, they also cite improvements in formation sampling and testing in NMR tools as bringing about advantages for them and helping to bring success. Now, we are seeing that the capacity in the market is beginning to tighten up a little bit in terms of availability of supply and demand. And with that, again, I encourage the oil and gas operators to reach out to their service providers and try to collaborate as best as possible based on plans, because everyone has finite amount of capital to invest. Obviously, the oil and gas operators have finite capital to drill wells, and the oil field service companies have finite capital to maintain their equipment, much less to upgrade with new technologies and to expand. And so I want to get into a few other areas here. And one of the things that we've noticed, given the tightening of the market, is particularly with major oil companies and national oil companies, where there used to be maybe a little bit greater emphasis in trying to use pricing as a key determinant in selection of a supplier. In a tightening market, what we're generally finding is that major oil companies and national oil companies are really interested in trying to make sure they have access to quality service and good technology in order to meet their investment plans. I mean, the pragmatic reality is oil and gas demand is going to continue to grow about 1 million barrels a year for the next 10 or 20 years, and the use of oil and gas will continue for the next several decades. And so as a consequence, we have to continue to invest to make sure that we have the availability of oil and gas. Naturally, the oil companies, major oil companies, the national oil companies, and the independents are focused on shareholder returns, and rightfully so. But the oil field service companies are also focused on shareholder returns. And so, again, the collaboration between the two is absolutely paramount to make sure that we have sufficient capacity and access to the quality service and technology that's required to drive this industry forward. We continue to see that international and offshore is growing in double-digit rates in the terms of the number of wells drilled in 23 versus 22. I mentioned to you that North America land is rolling over. We started out with U.S. land about 8 months ago at about 17% more wells to be drilled in 23 versus 22. And really, over the last 8 months, we have continued to reduce this number down to about 11, 12%, and it's probably going to end up in the 4, 5, 6, 7% range by the time we're done, based on current drilling patterns. Even though we're early into the year, there's still a lot of unknowns that could play out over the next 9 months here. We are definitely seeing amongst the oil and gas operators internationally and offshore a resurgence towards wanting to drill more exploration wells. This is in recognition of the fact that we need long life reserves and we need to restore production capacity that has been dwindled down over the last several years due to underinvestment. The implications for the formation evaluation services market is these exploration wells need to be fully evaluated, which means companies like Core Labs will see an increase in activity. A lot of the advanced technologies from the Big Four will start to be used with advanced imaging and tools and higher resolution tools and coring to try to make sure that these exploration wells are fully and adequately evaluated for their commercial abilities to produce. We're also seeing an increased need in higher temperature tools as well, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico and a lot of the deeper water plays. Overall, about 1 in 3, or 34 to 35% of oil and gas operators worldwide would like to see continued improvements in wireline logging and logging while drilling tools, and only about 1 in 5 operators are seeking improvements with mud logging and coring. Most of the improvements, again, this is another open-ended, unaided question, and the operators are free to cite whatever they would like. But when we read the commentary, what we find with wireline logging is the imaging tools and the higher resolution tools, followed by availability and delivery. There's certainly benefits in having access to real-time data to support decisions more quickly, and we see faster data transmission mentioned here, followed by high pressure, high temperature HPHT tools. When it comes to logging while drilling, a lot of the improvements that are desired are dealing with fluid sampling and identification. Again, you see availability mentioned in the top half of the list. So availability is hitting the list across the board. Again, speaks to the tightening of the market that we have, where we all need to work together to achieve more with less. So with that, why don't we go ahead and take a look at some of the market image amongst the various suppliers. When we look at the market brand image of the suppliers, regardless if that supplier is being used or not, certain formation evaluation suppliers, they have market images out there that are fairly defined. And we take a look at SLB. These positive correlations that really move over to the right on this graph indicate that SLB's market image as a leader on these applications and technologies extends beyond their customer base. And so SLB, Schlumberger, they seem to be viewed as a leader for digital solutions for formation evaluation, cost more but worth it, premium supplier. The negative correlation right here reflects that SLB is not really viewed as being a low-cost provider. Conversely, when you take a look at Halliburton for formation evaluation services, you see some negative correlations reflecting some brand image deficits. Put another way, not all of Halliburton's customers necessarily view Halliburton as being the technology or performance leader in these applications. Most commonly, Halliburton's used because they were viewed as a lower cost, value-based alternative to the higher priced SLB. Halliburton's pricing strategies have shifted recently, and so now they're not really necessarily viewed as cost more but worth it or being a low-cost provider, and we can talk more about that in a moment. When you take a look at Baker Hughes, their image seems to be in alignment with their customer base, which tends to be the 0% line, indicating that for the most part, Baker Hughes' image amongst their users tends to be viewed favorably. Baker Hughes' market image has improved over the last few years of our surveys, and their strongest market brand image is around being a value-based, lower-cost alternative to the higher-cost SLB, as well as being viewed fairly favorably for having a comprehensive lineup and deep resistivity tools. Weatherford's strongest market brand image is being viewed as a value-cost alternative to the higher-cost SLB. and also for having some compact, slim hole compact memory logging tools for horizontal and difficult to log wells. And so Weatherford's image is generally pretty strong here as well. So if you stack up the brand image, you can just see this brand image halo that SLB has in the marketplace relative to that of Halliburton and Baker Hughes in Weatherford. Turning to the wireline logging market and competitive landscape, what we find is that Schlumberger is the market share leader and has been. They have virtually half of the market globally. And no matter how we slice and dice the data, be it North America land or international land or offshore, SLB comes out on top in terms of market share. When we conduct the surveys and we interview the oil and gas operators, we ask the oil and gas operators to rate the performance of their suppliers on a scale of 1 to 10 on these 7 performance measures. And what we find is that the greatest variance in performance ratings is with pricing competitiveness, followed by technical support, accuracy, and then competency of field service personnel. And when we trend these many thousands of performance review ratings every year, we're able to take a look at the average line, which is the industry average performance. So you can see responsiveness to needs as an industry, it generally has improved from 2017 up to 2022. We have seen it cycle down in 2020, and we see it cycle down again in 2022 as demand for these services is outstripping, the capacity to serve the market. And in many cases, sometimes operators will actually retain their, say, wireline logging crew for a week or so on a holdover, knowing that they have another job coming up next week or the week after, and they're just concerned that perhaps that crew may not be available if they release the crew. And so there is tightness in the market. You also find that, performance review ratings for the industry have also declined for competency of field personnel from 21 to 22. Availability ratings have sharply declined from 21 to 22. And so we always like to take a look at the industry average review rating here as to what's going on. Then from there, we like to take a look at the suppliers' reviews. Like here, you can consistently see SLB receiving customer review ratings every survey year that are higher than the industry average for equipment quality, reliability, accuracy, not shown here, but also for field service and for technical support. You also see that Schlumberger, SLB, also receives the lowest ratings for pricing competitiveness because they're the most expensive. And Weatherford receives the most favorable review ratings for pricing because their pricing strategies are viewed the most favorably. You can see how Halliburton's pricing review ratings have declined here from 21 to 22, reflecting their change in pricing strategy and, trying to raise prices to get back more on par with industry normal pricing. And this varies, and we can segment the market internationally or offshore North America land. But for the sake of time, let's go to the value maps, which is probably the quickest way to display what the competitive landscape looks like. And what we see here in North America land is a very healthy market. Through the eyes of the North America land oil and gas operators, we see a very differentiated market. We see SLB very solidly up here in the top right-hand quadrant, cost more but worth it, right in the fair value fairway. We see Baker Hughes and Weatherford viewed as more of a value-based discount offerings. You get what you pay for. They're both delivering very strong values. And Halliburton is underperforming. Their performance profile is slightly out of alignment with their pricing strategies. When you move into the international market, you'll find that SLB is again well positioned as that premium-based supplier, cost more but worth it. Halliburton and Baker Hughes using lower pricing strategies to compete to help offset their performance shortcomings. And Weatherford's very strongly viewed as delivering value and positioned to grow internationally as international investment grows, and also offers opportunities for expansion, not just in market share and growth, but also perhaps optimization of financials. When we take a look in the offshore market, we see differentiated value, pay more, get more, pay less, get less, but you get what you pay for. And these are very healthy markets. And this reflects that the oil and gas operators, they too recognize that, hey, look, there is differentiation in the market. Not all oil field service companies perform at the same level, but they're all viewed as delivering a good value. And so I kind of go back to the need for oil and gas operators to collaborate with their oil field service providers, because you may have some high pressure, high temperature wells that require a certain set of skill sets and tools. You may have some other development wells that are just normally pressured, normal temperatures, don't really have a lot of drilling difficulty or tortuosity or hole swelling, to where maybe you can use a different set of tools and competencies in trying to allow fit for purpose. We do find that internationally, access to service and technology tend to have the highest correlation to likelihood to recommend a supplier, and that having access to quality service and technology are not only key drivers in the selection and recommendation of a wireline logging supplier internationally, but we also find that to be for offshore as well. Schlumberger SLB tends to be viewed as the premium-based supplier amongst those oil companies that really value quality service and technology. Oftentimes, SLB, their value proposition is commonly challenged by those that tend to be more price sensitive. North America land tends to be more price driven. Turning our attention to logging while drilling, what we find is that SLB is the market share leader. Halliburton and Baker Hughes are showing some market share decline trends, and Weatherford seems to be stable. SLB shows market share leadership for logging while drilling in North America land, international land, and offshore. We do see quite a bit of performance variance from the perspective of the users, the oil and gas operators, on accuracy of measurements and LWD quality and reliability. So again, obviously, when we look at the performance trend scores, we definitely see some variance in performance amongst the various suppliers. Not all LWD suppliers are viewed as performing at a similar level. In some cases, we find like Halliburton consistently receiving customer reviews that are below industry average for responsiveness, equipment quality, reliability, competency of field service personnel, in technical supports recently declined, as well as availability, but availability has declined overall for the industry, right? But and so it's very important as an oil company, as an oil and gas operator, to recognize that each supplier has some particular strengths and weaknesses. These strengths and weaknesses can vary by region, be it North America land, where Halliburton's viewed as underperforming, or offshore or international on this particular slide, where Halliburton is viewed as delivering a much better value. And you see differentiated value with SLB in the top right-hand quadrant, viewed as that premium-based supplier, cost more but worth it. Halliburton, Baker Hughes, and Weatherford are all viewed as delivering good, acceptable values. These trade-offs, though, along the price, value, and performance curve, are serious trade-offs that need to be critically evaluated. So if you're an oil company, and if you think all you're going to do is take the lowest price in order to make your selection, I would urge you to do a little bit more due diligence, and again, try to match up the strengths and weaknesses of each supplier, because each supplier has distinct strengths and weaknesses. And the more you understand the capabilities of the oil field service companies, the better you can pick and choose win-win situations, not just for the oil field service provider, but also for you, the operator. At the end of the day, this needs to be a win-win in order to drive the efficiencies that we need for the industry. Offshore, we see differentiated performance as well. Again, service and technology tend to be key drivers internationally and offshore, and price tends to be more of a factor in selection of an LWD supplier in North America land. Again, SLB tends to be viewed most favorably among those oil and gas operators that really value quality service and technology, whereas the price buyers really tend to challenge SLB's value proposition. When we move to mud logging or surface logging, not all wells use it, of course, and we do see a trend of declining use of mud logging and surface logging. But generally speaking, the advanced cuttings technologies and characterization and advanced mud gas evaluation tends to be most heavily used and subscribed to internationally and offshore. In many cases, operators simply say, look, I don't really need this advanced analysis. In some cases, obviously not all wells are even mud logged or surface logged, indicating that they believe it's not needed. But where the oil and gas operators are looking for improvements in mud logging, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, but here we're just going to focus on just measurements. Before, they were talking about access to competent personnel and availability, as well as improved technologies. But amongst the technology sector, you can see the role that mud logging is playing in being able to provide quicker real-time analysis to help drive geosteering and in operations at the rig site. So definitely mud logging has advanced quite a bit and a lot more sophisticated than when I was mud logging wells in the middle 1980s as a geologist. When we take a look at the overall competitive landscape, the market for North America land is extremely fragmented. There were 27 different mud loggers cited as being used. Edge mud logging is the market share leader, followed by Diversified. You can see, really no single supplier other than Edge and Diversified, have a significant part of the market. The market's highly fragmented. When you move into the Gulf of Mexico, you see Diversified and SLB and Halliburton, and you see SLB having a pretty good presence along with Halliburton internationally in offshore, followed by Baker Hughes, and you get Geolog and Excellence Mud Logging. Used to be the old Weatherford Mud Logging that was sold off, Xlog. We see quite a bit of performance variance from the operator's perspective for surface logging, mud logging. In the North America land market, Edge mud logging clearly is distinguished in terms of having the best overall value and performance. Edge also has partnered up with SLB and has access to SLB's advanced mud gas analysis and detection technologies. Diversified's performance and competitive position has been declining over the last 2 or 3 years in North America land. But I think a portion of that is due to Diversified maybe reshifting some of their focus to try to grow internationally in the Middle East, where they're just beginning to gain some traction out there and viewed favorably, and also in the offshore market, where Diversified has been focusing some time and attention to grow out in the offshore market, and they're viewed favorably there. So I think Diversified's declining performance and competitive position in North America land is probably correlated to perhaps them shifting some of their focus internationally and offshore. When we move internationally and offshore, we do see differentiated value. Again, SLB and the premium quadrant, top right, cost more but worth it. And then you've got a myriad of regional suppliers that we just kind of aggregate together as all others, showing up as more of a discount provider. But we see clearly differentiated value. You get what you pay for. Halliburton underperforming slightly internationally, and but Halliburton coming back into the fair value fairway in the offshore market. Again, we see some distinction between service and technology and price buyers. When you move into the North America land market for mud logging, you can see exactly how price sensitive it is. Edge looks really strong amongst those that are very price conscious, as well as those that value quality service. Whereas for mud logging offshore, you'll find that quality service and technology tends to play a greater role. Again, you see SLB viewed more favorably amongst those oil and gas operators, seeking out quality service and technology in their mud loggers, whereas amongst the price-sensitive buyers in the offshore market, again, SLB's value propositions being heavily challenged, whereas Geolog and the regional suppliers tend to be viewed as delivering the best overall value in the eyes of those oil and gas operators who place greatest emphasis on pricing. Turning to coring and analysis, not all wells use coring. Only about 12% of the wells use any kind of coring of any type. Sidewall cores tend to more sidewall cores versus conventional cores by about a 60-40 split. When it comes to conventional downhole coring, Baker Hughes is the market share leader, followed by CorePro and Canamera. Baker Hughes viewed as delivering, very solid performance. CorePro and Baker Hughes view very similarly. When you move to sidewall coring, SLB is the market share leader, followed by Halliburton and Baker Hughes. We see quite a bit of performance variance amongst the sidewall coring suppliers. Schlumberger is viewed as the overall top performing supplier, costs more but worth it. You see Halliburton and Baker Hughes viewed as value-based alternatives to SLB. When you go to fluid analysis, what we find is that Core Labs is the leadership position in market penetration and market share. Core Labs has about 50% of the market for core analysis. And when you take a look at their recommendation ratings as measured by the Net Promoter Score, Core Labs has very high customer loyalty. 3/4 of their customers would highly recommend Core Lab for future service, for future work. Very few detractors. Conversely, where you see Stratum has 80% of their customers giving them passive or neutral ratings. And so Core Labs has the highest customer loyalty and has the highest market share. So when you look at their Net Promoter Score trends or their customer loyalty trends, they're consistently higher than industry average, whereas if you take a look at Stratum, you can see they tend to trend below, but had a year of improvement that went back down, could be due to some sampling, whereas some of the other regional laboratories have consistently trended below the industry average, but do show a trend of improvement. So check and see if we have any questions. In terms of 2023, obviously you see it every day when you wake up in the market. The volatility in the market is extreme, both from interest rates and bank defaults to the price of oil and natural gas. I think that what you're going to see continue to drive the rest of 23 is a relatively tight market for oil field services. And I think the oil and gas operators need to continue to lean in forward and collaborate with the oil field service companies so that both operators and service companies can make the best use of everyone's mutually finite resources. Energy demand will continue to grow over the next 10 to 20 years. And so as we move from where we are now, about 102 million barrels a day to 110 to possibly 120 million barrels a day, continued investment is going to have to take place. And so the market is still structurally relatively strong for both oil companies and for oil field service companies. The constraints and the negative policies that are placed on the oil and gas industry are creating restrictions and creating some of these elevated prices that we see in the industry, which in large measure benefits both operators and service providers. The elevated oil prices over the last few years has contributed to cost inflation that we're all trying to wrestle with on the macro level. So in summary, I think the backdrop in the macro market for the oil and gas industry will remain durably strong over the next several years. It'll be a good environment for oil companies to generate very healthy profits and cash flows. Oil field service companies should be able to do the same. Both need to employ capital discipline to make sure that the markets are not too overly supplied, but at the same time, as we ration our capital and we judiciously invest our capital, there's going to be tightnesses in the markets and some disequilibrium. So I cannot overemphasize the need for the operators and the service companies to kind of think of each other as not supplier and customer, but as partners in this market where we're a really small group of people in totality of the population of the earth that's responsible for delivering the energy for the future of the earth and for all users of energy globally. In terms of other reports, we recently published some intervention services reports for case toll and wireline and acid stimulation. We'll be reaching out to the oil and gas operators in the coming months for updates on drilling services and artificial lift and production chemical. So for any oil and gas operators that would like to participate in our future surveys, please reach out to us. If you're an oil and gas operator and you'd like for us to perhaps present to your teams and provide some more customized market updates, we'd be glad to do that as well. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I'd like to thank all the oil and gas operators who participate in our industry surveys. And we don't seem to have any questions in the chat box, so please reach out if you have any questions. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you for attending today. Bye now.